It began with a single letter in the mail. Inside was a letter written in stark black capitals, an anonymous terrorizer that seemed to know everything about everyone in Circleville. Affairs, embezzlement, violence behind closed doors, even allegations of murder. And soon, the town would learn that whoever was behind the Circleville Letters was willing to kill to prove their point. For the next 25 years, the Circleville letter writer tore families apart, lost people their jobs, and yes, attempted to kill possibly hundreds of people. How could one person watch an entire community so closely, and why were they so desperate to target these individuals specifically? This is the story of the Circleville Letters, one of America's most perplexing mysteries. Let's get into it. In 1976, a letter arrived in the mailbox of Gordon Massey, the town's school superintendent. The letter was handwritten in blocky, neat letters, accusing Massey of asking out young girls and the female bus drivers. To Massey, who had a wife and teenage son, this would have been a career-ending accusation, so he kept quiet about the letter at first. I need to add here that Massey never budged on the fact that none of the accusations were true. But even if this nutcase was just making up outrageous stories, a man in his position couldn't have that kind of gossip hanging around town. But the writer was insistent. He continued to leave letters in Massey's mailbox for the next few months, continuously demanding that Massey stop harassing young girls and married women. It got so bad that the writer threatened to slash Massey's tires and to write letters to his superiors about these allegations. And the writer kept his word. Sure enough, a few months and half a dozen letters later, 2 letters arrived for the school board, demanding that they fire Massey for, and I quote, putting the moves on the female bus drivers and young girls. He named the sheriff and the state prosecutor as corrupt, murderers, and predators of children. In the middle of all these outrageous allegations, he singled out one specific bus driver, Mary Gillespie, saying that she was unfaithful to her husband with Massey. According to the writer, these 2 specifically were so morally corrupt, more so than anyone else, and they needed to be brought to justice for their sins. Now, our mystery writer could have been just any crazy person, right? Well, he knew Mary's driver's ID, the number plate of the bus she drove, that she had a daughter in the school, and he definitely knew her address because Mary had been receiving the same letters that Massey had for the same amount of time. Massey and Mary have always stood firm that they were not having an affair, back then at least. But I'm getting ahead of the timeline. Back to the story. According to both parties, they were in happy marriages, and this mysterious writer and his threats were based on absolutely nothing. But it does seem that Mary was the intended target of the Circleville Letters, because this person had a serious vendetta against her, more so than anyone else in this strange tale, as we'll soon see. The writer had sent letters directly to Mary and Massey's addresses, openly threatening them and their children, promising to send evidence to their superiors to take their sinful affair to the papers. Whether their claims were true or not, this was getting seriously concerning. We're talking about little kids, marriages, and jobs all being put in danger here. But this was also the 1970s, so it's not like they had ring cameras to catch this creep's car or him mailing the letters. No one could do anything but wait until this freako slipped up or showed themselves. All of the letters were postmarked to Columbus, 30 minutes north of Circleville. And the writer, even though they definitely tried to obscure it, was educated. He, and I say he, simply out of habit, as we still don't know who this person is. Almost every expert out there agrees that this person wrote in blocky capitalized handwriting, probably with a closed fist to mask their natural handwriting. Furthermore, the spelling and grammatical errors were intentionally placed. Words that were misspelled in one letter appeared in later letters spelled correctly. Their higher learning becomes extremely evident when you look at their correct use of punctuation. They might have tried to misspell words on purpose, but they forgot that very few people actually use colons and commas in the correct places. Even those with a high school education get it wrong most of the time. It's hard to say if police ran prints on the letters because they never actually did anything about them. As far as they were concerned, if the predator did not physically attack anyone or illegally enter the victim's properties, it was not a police matter. In the meantime, the school board was not going to entertain a random letter, and Mary was throwing her letters in the trash, keeping quiet about the threats because she didn't want trouble at her job or in her marriage. So the writer wrote to Ron Gillespie, Mary's husband. The writer told Ron that his wife was cheating on him and that if Ron didn't put a stop to it, then Ron's life was going to be in danger too. You're probably thinking that the writer is completely off their rocker. How is threatening the life of Ron, who's just the innocent husband, going to somehow solve all of this? And on that note, even if it all was true, how is this any of the writer's business? Did they just decide that the town needed a vigilante to punish everyone for their imagined sins? Clearly, this person was not mentally well. He was about to dial up the crazy to 11. When none of the receivers acted on his commands, he started threatening to take the matter public, to hurt their children, to plaster their faces on billboards. Since the police weren't doing much, the families of Massey and the Gillespies got together, along with Ron Gillespie's sister and her husband, Karen and Paul Freshour, to try to devise a plan of some kind. They studied the letters and came to the conclusion that they only had one suspect, David Longberry, a bus driver who'd made advances toward Mary and a few other female bus drivers, only to get soundly rejected. He'd loudly complained about Massey, who was quite handsome and who he thought the bus driver girls were fawning over like a pack of twittering teenage girls. In other words, he had reason to hate both Massey and Mary. The three couples sent him a letter warning him to stop his harassment and that they'd take further actions if he didn't. With no other evidence besides the fact that Mary thought Longberry was creepy, Longberry didn't reply, but the writer sure did. A few weeks later, Ron drove past a sign next to the road on his way to work. Scrawled in the same blocky handwriting was a bold message that proclaimed that Massey had slept with the Gillespies' 12-year-old daughter. This was a hideous proclamation, and you'll be happy to hear a completely false claim. Every investigation has proven that Massey had not preyed on the child. Still, the signs kept coming, dozens of them, all telling the town that Massey was a child predator and a womanizer. The gossip was so intense that both couples were losing sleep over it. Ron had to wake up 2 hours early every morning to tear more signs down. Mary was finding them spaced along her bus route where her daughter could see them, and keeping up with them all was an impossible task. The townspeople were being absolute vultures about this news. Massey's job was in serious jeopardy, and they were even calling for Mary to be dismissed. It all came to a head on Friday, the 14th of August. Mary had left town with her sister-in-law to escape the constant scrutiny when her husband received a call on the home phone. Their 12-year-old daughter was home too, and this was what she reported happened. Ron answered the phone. It was the letter writer, and Ron recognized the voice on the other end of the line. He slammed down the phone, kissed his daughter, and picked up a revolver before getting into his car and speeding off. Whoever was on the other end of the line, Ron now knew who he was, and he was going to end this nightmare once and for all. 10 minutes away from his home, on Pike Drive, Ron crashed his car into a tree. He was partially ejected from his windshield and died on impact. But this was far from a speeding car and a lack of a seatbelt. Ballistics showed that Ron had fired his gun at some point, probably while driving after the writer. So had he recognized the voice over the phone, or had he seen someone from his home's window and given chase? Either way, Ron had been hot on the writer's tail, and he'd probably seen his car or even the person themselves. This horrible and violent death should have spooked the writer into hiding for good, right? Wrong. Mary continued to receive letters for years afterward, calling her and her daughter the most obscene names. In 1983, after 7 years and losing her husband, Mary had begun to just throw the letters in the trash. Hell, it wasn't like the police were doing anything about it anyway. That February, the posters came back. On her route to the school, with a bus full of kids, Mary saw the first poster in 5 years, calling her and her now adult daughter the most hideous names. When Mary tried to remove the sign, she discovered it was attached to a box rigged with a gun designed to fire when tampered with. Horrified, she called police. At least this time the authorities couldn't claim that there hadn't been a direct attempt on her life. Thankfully, the booby trap was an amateur job, so it never detonated, or else Mary would have been dead on the spot. And speaking of amateur, whoever set the booby trap was spotted by another bus driver who described a tall, skinny man driving a bright yellow Camino, and he'd done a terrible job of filing off the serial number on the firearm. Want to take a guess who it traced back to? Paul Freshour, Mary's own brother-in-law. Yeah, I didn't see that one coming either. Why on earth would Paul go after his own family members, subjecting them to years of torture and possibly causing his wife's brother's death? In all fairness, Ron's death was accidental due to his speeding, lack of a safety belt, and a higher than safe amount of alcohol in his system. But still, Ron would never have been out there if it weren't for their harasser. Paul worked in Columbus, making it possible for him to have mailed the letters. He claimed that the gun had been stolen years ago and that he was completely innocent. The sheriff then went on to take a handwriting sample from Paul, but told him to copy the blocky letters as best as he could. Paul, who was stupid enough to do this without a lawyer present, got arrested because after attempting to copy a relatively easy example onto a piece of paper, he did a fair job of it, and the sheriff used that as evidence to warrant an arrest. Paul was sent to 25 years in prison for the attempted murder of his sister-in-law. I don't know about you, but that doesn't fly for me at all. Other than his place of work matching the sender's location, which most of Circleville's men would be guilty of, and a gun that he hadn't seen in years, there was nothing to base a guilty conviction on at all. The Circleville letters were littered with red herrings, false accusations, and were written by someone who was most likely of a high IQ, and Paul was, well, not exactly a rocket scientist. He'd never shown any animosity toward Mary or Ron, and he didn't even know Massey. So why go to all this trouble to harass people he barely knew? Actually, the badly filed away serial number on the firearm looks more like an intentional attempt to frame Paul than Paul trying to obscure its ownership. On that note, Paul didn't match the description of the tall, skinny man that was seen at the place where the rigged gun was hidden, whereas Paul was short and stout with a generous belly. And to add even more fuel to the conspiracy train, the letters didn't stop coming. Thousands of them. They were still all postmarked as coming from Columbus, and they were being delivered to schools, public offices, and to police stations all over the state. Same handwriting, same threats to expose imaginary affairs and moral sins, and some letters even contained powdered arsenic. Thankfully, no one was poisoned. Instead of looking into Paul's case again, authorities doubled down and placed Paul in solitary confinement, banning him from mailing any letters. And you guessed it, the letters still kept appearing in people's mailboxes, and it went on for years. Paul, who I'm sorry to say was clearly innocent of any crime, tried to appeal his case, but even at his parole hearing, he was continuously turned down. Because the justice system doesn't care about evidence or an entire state being harassed, and they certainly weren't going to let an innocent man go free. Poor Paul even got his own string of letters while in prison, taunting his confinement. Paul was released in 1994, and soon after the letters slowly dried up, with Mary being the last to receive one. Paul went to the FBI, but they never picked the case up, making the Circleville Letters a 25-year-long campaign of harassment. You'd think that the writer, who'd added arsenic to some of the letters meant for state officials, judges, school principals, and sheriffs, would warrant a serious investigation. I mean, that's attempted murder. Yet, not a single letter was ran for fingerprints, DNA, or even looked at from an investigative standpoint at all. This guy was basically a domestic terrorist, yet he was treated like an annoyance that needed to be ignored. Here's the point where I'd look at the suspects, but I think we can all agree that Paul Freshour is innocent. But there's a nugget of information that I hadn't mentioned before, Mary's confession. She later came out admitting to the affair. Sort of. She said that after the letters started coming, she and Massey found solace with each other. You know, because they were both the target of a madman? She said it happened after the letters started coming and after her husband, Ron, died. Personally, I think that's an awfully convenient timeline. Mary could tell some part of the truth, but keep herself innocent as a cheater because her timeline allowed the affair to have happened after she was divorced. And it makes any assumptions we could have made completely useless. Massey and Mary lied, simple as that. We have no way of knowing now whether or not this guy truly was surveilling anyone, or if this was a total delusion. That changes everything, because now we have no profile to build off of. If Mary and Massey had just been open about everything from the start, we could have made some proper deductions. But now, we haven't got squat. Many still believe it was Paul and that he just had an accomplice. But that's 2 decades to keep a pretty elaborate ruse going and a whole lot of effort to put into sending thousands upon thousands of letters. I just don't see it happening, especially since he could not possibly have sent the letters from prison. Some even think his ex-wife was in on it. After the divorce, the letters began appearing in typed form. Karen Freshour definitely owned a typewriter. She also dated a man that owned a yellow Camino, a pretty rare color for any car. But I'm not convinced they had a messy divorce and absolutely hated each other's guts long before the charge that sent Paul to prison. I can't imagine that scorned ex-wife keeping the ruse up for a man that she despised. Then we have Longberry, the bus driver that Mary thought was creepy. He was convicted of assaulting a child, so he definitely wasn't a stand-up guy, but there's no evidence to actually tie him to the Circleville Letters. Or the Freshours initially started the letters, and after Paul's conviction, several copycats jumped into the fray. Whatever the case, it went on for more than 2 decades, and that's one hell of a commitment to keep up, only for police to do virtually nothing about any of it. That is the biggest mystery for me. Why on earth did police and the FBI just leave a madman to run around attempting to shoot, poison, and discredit people left and right for 2 decades? 25 years. That's how long the Circleville Letters terrorized an entire town, and to this day, no one knows for sure who wrote them. Was Paul Freshour framed? Did Mary Gillespie know more than she admitted? Or was the real writer hiding in plain sight? And most importantly, what does it say about a community when secrets, real or imagined, become weapons? Remember to hit like and to follow for more chilling stories. And tell me in the comments, who do you think was behind the Circleville Letters? See you in the next one, people. Cheers.